In January 1995, 14 wolves were released into Yellowstone National Park, ending a 70-year absence caused by a deliberate government eradication campaign that began in 1907. What followed became one of the most famous conservation stories ever told, viewed by tens of millions of people worldwide in a single viral video. It's also, 30 years later, at the center of one of the most heated scientific disputes in modern ecology, with researchers publicly accusing each other of flawed analysis and misleading data. The wolves are real. The story about what they did to the rivers might not be. Subscribe now before we continue. The story everyone knows. The narrative goes like this. Before 1995, decades without wolves allowed elk populations to grow unchecked, and the elk overgrazed the willows, aspens, and cottonwoods lining Yellowstone's rivers and streams, since nothing was pressuring them to move on. That overgrazing led to erosion, destabilized riverbanks, and habitat loss for countless other species. Then the wolves came back. According to the story, they didn't just hunt elk directly. They changed elk behavior, creating what researchers termed a landscape of fear, making elk too nervous to linger in exposed riverside areas where a wolf could corner them. Freed from constant grazing pressure, willows and aspens recovered. Their roots stabilized the riverbanks. Beavers returned, building dams that created new wetland habitat. Songbirds came back. Even the rivers themselves were said to have physically changed course, becoming straighter and more fixed, because the regenerated vegetation held the banks together. A 2014 video narrated by environmental writer George Monbiot, called How Wolves Change Rivers, popularized this exact version of events and has since been viewed more than 40 million times. It's easy to understand why this narrative spread as fast as it did. It's a genuinely elegant idea, a single predator species triggering a cascade of ecological benefits that ripples all the way down to the physical shape of a river. And it gave conservationists a clean, simple, emotionally powerful case for reintroducing large predators elsewhere in the world. The concept even has a proper scientific name: a trophic cascade, ecologist jargon for a chain reaction that moves down through multiple levels of a food web. A 2004 study by researchers William Ripple and Robert Bechter laid out the theoretical case for exactly this kind of predation-driven cascade, and subsequent research over the following 2 decades appeared, to many observers, to confirm it. Here's what the viral version leaves out entirely. Since at least the early 2000s, a separate group of researchers, including Yellowstone wolf biologist Doug Smith and Utah State University ecologist Dan McNulty, have been directly disputing both the scale and the cause of any vegetation recovery, in a dispute that has run continuously in scientific journals for more than 2 decades and is, as of late 2025, still actively unresolved. The most recent flashpoint came in 2025, when Ripple and colleagues published a paper claiming Yellowstone's willows had seen an astonishing 1,500% increase in crown volume since wolves returned, describing it as one of the strongest trophic cascades ever documented anywhere. Within months, a separate team of researchers published a direct rebuttal in the same journal, arguing the claim was invalid due to what they called fundamental methodological flaws, including comparing measurements taken from mismatched locations across different years and applying a statistical model the critics say produces misleading results almost by definition, regardless of what's actually happening to the plants. McNulty has pointed out something more fundamental underlying the entire dispute. To properly prove wolves caused any recovery, researchers would need to isolate the effect of wolves specifically from every other factor at play, including other predators, changing elk numbers from causes unrelated to wolves, and human hunting outside the park, and then measure how much of any recovery is attributable to wolves alone, rather than simply observing that both wolves and some vegetation. Recovery happened during the same multi-decade period. A separate, frequently cited 2013 study by Kristen Marshall and colleagues, published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B, examined the physical river changes directly and concluded that stream hydrology itself was limiting how much riparian vegetation could actually recover, regardless of elk browsing pressure, suggesting the dramatic river reshaping claim doesn't hold up under direct physical measurement the way the viral story suggests. What both sides actually agree on, it's worth being precise about where the genuine scientific consensus actually sits, because it isn't nothing. Researchers broadly agree that wolf reintroduction reduced elk populations to some meaningful degree, and that this has produced real, measurable ecological benefits elsewhere in the food web, most clearly in an increased supply of carrion supporting bears, coyotes, and eagles. What remains genuinely contested is the specific, dramatic claim about vegetation recovery and physical river reshaping, the exact part of the story responsible for 40 million views and a household name conservation narrative. Doug Smith, who has spent decades studying Yellowstone's wolves directly, has described the ongoing dispute as frustrating precisely because of this gap between public perception and scientific certainty. In his view, the argument has pushed some people toward overstating the benefits of wolf recovery, while pushing others toward dismissing the entire concept of a trophic cascade altogether, when the reality sitting underneath both extremes is genuinely complicated. And Yellowstone remains, in the words of researchers studying it, too complex and dynamic an ecosystem to cleanly attribute to any single cause. 14 wolves really were released into Yellowstone in 1995. Elk populations really have declined since then, and the park really has seen at least some recovery in vegetation and biodiversity over the following decades. Whatever role wolves played in that story is real. What isn't settled, more than 30 years and multiple competing scientific papers later, is whether the elegant, viral version of events, wolves reshaping rivers through fear alone, is scientifically accurate, or whether it's a compelling story that outpaced the actual evidence supporting it. Two of the researchers who've spent the most time studying this exact question, on opposite sides of the debate, agree on at least one thing. After 30 years of dedicated research, nobody has definitively settled it either way.